Well, hello, welcome to another in our series of Choice Words videos where we get to speak to key decision makers in the world of UK fund management, fund selection and fund research. I'm Julian Marr, I'm Editorial Director of Wealthwise Media, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to John Husselby, Head of the Multi-Asset Team at Liontrust. Hello, John.
Hello there.
Say hello, Huss. Less me, more of you. Into the first question straight away. What most interests you about the current investment outlook? What gives you pause for thought?
Pause for thought. Yeah, I think today the opportunity and the challenges, are sort of either side of the coin basically, and that's all surrounds globalization and globalization contracting, and as a result of that, we've got a global economy which is fragmenting, and there's none better evidence of that than over the last year or so, where you've seen essentially sort of Europe cutting rates. You've seen the US initially cut rates and then go and hold. And remember, some of the expectations of cutting was a lot more what they've done. And then thirdly, in a different direction, i.e. upwards, we've seen Japan put rates up. So in a world which is now fragmenting in terms of a global economy, that creates both opportunities and challenges. I think one of the good things that has come to pass is that basically inflation, it seems that central banks have got a grip on that, a grip that not necessarily takes it back down to that sort of 2% target, but a grip that keeps it sort of lower towards it. But I do think that we are in an environment now where inflation is, we're in a secular inflationary environment, having been in a deflationary environment for the whole of my career, which is now nearly 40 years, Jules.
Still don't believe it. You told me before, I still can't believe time flies.
But I do think that, what does that mean? It means that the cost of capital goes up. But the cost of capital is different in each of countries, regions around the world. As such, what that means is different companies, different sectors, different industries, different countries basically will benefit at different times. We're no longer in a sort of synchronized world, if we were in one, but what seemed to be a synchronized world. And so, if the US was the big winner over a decade or so, then I think going forward, the case for diversification is probably stronger today than what it's ever been. So I'm positive on the basis that inflation's come down. It seems, and perhaps we should all be touching wood together, it seems that central banks have managed to bring that down without bumping into a big recession. And not to say that we won't see a recession, but if we do, it's going to be a shallow one. We see sort of numbers where perhaps when we're bouncing around zero, of course, we could fall into a technical recession. So, yeah, I am, in terms of an outlook today, I would say I'm risk on.
Good start, good scene setting. We'll go then from the macro right down to the micro. When you're looking at a particular investment, what is it that most attracts you to an investment? What do you see as a red flag?
Well, I suppose that what we're looking at the end of the day is we're looking to outsource investment. So we're looking for great fund managers or great fund manager type scenarios. So, and what we're looking for there, and this is where I have a strong belief in that there is no such thing as consistency of performance short term. I think it does exist over the long term. So over the short term, it has to be consistency of process and style. So we are looking like a football team, and I know we share that passion, but like a football team, we're looking to build our portfolios with a blend of managers and a blend of styles. And I think you're going to like my football analogy in terms of basically what I look for in a manager. And we've got that acronym, the Spurs. Yes, the video's going to turn off now.
I was going to say, we had that automatic build. Who had 5.5 minutes, whatever, on the sweepstake? Yeah. Anyway, we knew it was coming. Bring it on. Yeah.
So S is for stamina. So it's about long term. The P is for process, consistency of process. U is understanding. Understanding is experience and knowledge in the market, being through cycles, resoluteness for the R, and that's very much about conviction and conviction in what you do. And finally, S for stimulus, and stimulus can be economic. In other words, how people want to be rewarded. But I just find that when you're investing with good long-term fund managers, great managers, and I've worked with many and I've invested with a lot of them, at the end of the day, they're just like winning. They're like winning over a period of time. They see it as a challenge. It's a mental challenge. It's a puzzle every single day over the market, and they just like winning.
See, it's only just occurred to me, it's just lucky you supported Spurs and not Action and Stanley. Yes, a long old.
Yeah, we'd be on season 15 by now, wouldn't we?
We would be. Is there maybe just a flip side of that? The red flags? Is there anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think the red flag is. I mean, yeah, we can go through the sort of the normal stuff, which should be picked up in any process in terms of risk management. But you're trying to nail me down, perhaps just to one. Let's do that, and it's got to be liquidity.
Okay.
I mean, at the end of the day, liquidity is the big one, and that's what you've got to be wary about. Now, perhaps liquidity hasn't been that important, for a while, but in 2008. By God, liquidity was a very important thing. So I think liquidity, I think making sure that, if you've got an investment process which is successful with a small fund, as it grows, it becomes larger, and then you have challenges, and there's the liquidity challenge. So, I once worked at Henderson's with John Alexander, who was I'd say a prolific UK small cap investor. And, it was almost like clockwork. That fund would operate very well from sort of about 100 million to 300 million. Remember, we're going back now to the 90s, so a different size of market. But from 100 million to 300 million, probably one of the best small cap funds. At that point, he would almost sort of say, at 300 million, don't buy me because I'm almost at the limit of my capacity. And the funny thing was, it would tend to underperform. People would redeem and get back to 100 million, and guess what? The whole cycle would go again. And I think that is a definite sort of acknowledgement in terms of liquidity.
That's very interesting. It also ties in very neatly with my next question, I suspect, which is the extent to which private investors and their advisors should be thinking beyond equities and bonds to more alternative investments, because liquidity is a clear consideration there.
I think it's a massive consideration. And again, we went through that period in a low risk, but a low inflationary, low interest rate environment, I should say, where people were looking for enhanced income or different sources of capital. I think when it comes to alternatives, I think you fall into two buckets. You're either looking to enhance your returns or protect on the downside. But either way, you're looking for further diversification. Most of these things tend to get promoted after they performed rather than before they were performed. It's all about manager skill. That's your determination here. And, there's no asset class to think about. There's no sector or anything like that. It's all about determining manager skill. And again, when fingers have been burnt in the past, I think it's because of that. Therefore, to be a so-called professional fund selector, the advantage we do have beyond an information information advantages basically disappeared these days. But what we do have is access to managers and regular access to managers. And it's that transparency that I think helps us with our risk management.
Thank you. Moving on to client comms now, and I know very prolific in that over the years, but how would you describe your approach to client communications?
Well, I think when you think of the various different sort of business models out there, and we're firmly in that sort of multi-asset space, and we are competing against those who lead perhaps on technology, those who lead on price, and those who lead on performance, which I've already stated my sort of objection to that in terms of it's not sustainable. And I think where our edge is to lead on service. And I think at the end of the day, I said, having done this for quite a while now, I think there are three things that you've got to deliver to clients. And that is, first-class administration. Now, perhaps these days it's more outsourced to the platforms and the like. First-class service, though, is the second, and you can be in control of that. And the third thing you can be controlled is performance in line with expectations. if the advisor is entrusting you with their client's money, and by the way, it's quite an honour to have that. I don't take that that lightly in that respect. Then you've got to be able to inform them on a regular basis and in many different ways. What's going on within the portfolios. So I think we very much try to work as hard as we can in terms of being a service-led provider in the multi-asset space. Currently, we're doing a series of roundtables around the country, and that's an opportunity to talk to our advisors, manage those expectations of where we've been, perhaps a little bit where we're going. I don't have a crystal ball, but clearly, we try to make some expectations of what we think is going on. But it's a great opportunity to have a two-way conversation. I think so many times we base ourselves in London. To sit in London and just think what's going on is wrong. I think a great example of that actually, and remember it very well, was the Brexit vote. So again, we're doing our regular sort of roundtables or events around the country, and you're wandering around, and the City of London, I think, if you remember, was very strongly that the Remain. Mm-hmm. When we went out and about, started talking to clients, you suddenly thought, hang on a minute, I'm getting too many people that want to say, we're out. And also, you can't help but notice, the boards outside people's houses as well. And that was sort of thinking, well, actually, I'm not quite sure this is a shoe-in here. And I remember coming back to the office and sitting opposite me was Mark Williams, who ran the Asia team in those days. And I said to Mark, actually, going out and about, I don't think that this vote is as clear as we think. I think it's going to be a lot closer. I didn't say that I think we're going to be out, but I said it was going to be a lot closer. And that is the reward you get by going out and about and and not just sitting in some sort of, what do they call it, an ivory tower, don't they? Have you ever seen one of those?
Ivory towers, not really. Obviously, I've got one at home, but that Cherry doesn't let me anywhere near it. So let's do more personal questions now. What was your path into the wonderful world of investment, and what do you think in a parallel universe you'd be doing if you hadn't taken it?
Yeah, I think my path is probably. I still think the foundations of my path exist, but I think the way that to go about it, I think, would be more challenging today. So I was probably quite lucky that as a young teenager, I knew what I wanted to do. And I having a couple of kids myself, it's not necessarily the case. And indeed, doing mentoring today, it's not necessarily the case. Not only for teenagers, but people in their 20s and their 30s still not quite clear what they want to do. And I think one sort of comment on that is, and don't worry about that in that respect, because you will fall into something you like and you love. And for me, the whole world of financial markets was something that I sort of very much got exposed to when I was quite young through my grandfather on my mother's side. I'm one of three brothers. I am the baby. I always would say that, which had its sort of opportunities and challenges from that. But one of the things that I found myself doing was basically staying with Grandad on weekends when my two brothers were off swimming galas. They were quite good at swimming, to say the least, in that respect. And it was a fairly regular thing. Grandad basically had shares, and on a Saturday morning, we would wake up. We would walk down to the newsagents. We would do basically. Grandad would buy the Racing Post, he'd buy the FT, and I'd probably buy a comic or something like that. We would come back, we'd have breakfast. Dripping was a thing in those days. Right. Yeah. Anyway, we won't go on to that. It's not a food program, is it? No. Grandad would get a ledger out. That's his ledger of shares. He would shout out basically the share prices. I would write them in the book. I would then do the mental arithmetic in terms of his valuation. But then we would look through the book and we would look for price changes, and we would look for stories in the FT to sort of basically work out why the price has changed. Now, most of the stocks he had were, sort of retail, pubs, and sort of cruise lines and things like that. Things that he really much knew about, things that he could see day in, day out. He wasn't necessarily punting or speculating. He was just saying, I think they've got a good product, so I'm going to buy some shares in that. That whetted my appetite for investing. I mean, and just going back to the Racing Post, the other thing we would do was then select the horses, and we'd bet down to the bookies, and Grandad would put on his Super Six or whatever it was, and we would come back and watch the racing in the afternoon, just after obviously the wrestling.
The wrestling, obviously, yes.
So there we are. I'm of that age. So that whetted my appetite. I had an opportunity to go to university. Both of my brothers went into further education. I decided I would buck the trend, and also buck the sort of comparison between how well have your brothers done compared to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
No one I knew was in the city, in the family, I should say, but in my sort of network, and I'm a very keen golfer. Most people know that who know me, and there are plenty of people at the local golf club who are stockbrokers or in the city, and again, I sort of started to talk to them about if I'm interested in financial markets, what roles are there, and in those days it was merchant banks, and they're investment banks today, but merchant banks then. And there was opportunities for school leavers, and literally I wrote a letter, got interviews, got offered jobs, and ended up at Rothschild's. Actually, where we're recording this today is 200 yards over my shoulder and up a bit.
Quite a lot up a bit, and
Yeah.
you're down in the basement. And Palo University, what would you be, professional golfer?
Yeah, I mean,
Football manager?
yeah, no. I seriously, as I said, I didn't really have any other idea apart from this is what I want to do and want to get involved in. And I think I don't think I'm unique in that. I do think I'm lucky in that. And so therefore, I had my eyes on the prize, and however I was going to get there, that's where I wanted to get. And I think, as again, when doing mentoring, it's really clear that, sometimes you have to take, steps to the side, to basically find your final destination. So, yeah, I don't really have. I can't really sort of say no. If I wasn't doing this, I would like to have done that, because it wouldn't be true, because I knew exactly what I wanted to do.
No, fair enough. Well, I think the difference for you is knowing exactly what you want to do. I knew what I wanted to do when I was a teenager, but I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and how wrong I was. So I did all the qualification. So the trick, therefore, is realizing that maybe as a teenager, you don't know what you don't know what you don't know, for a start. And it took me a while to find out. So you were lucky, because you did know what you wanted.
But I basically thought to myself, if I go to so I had the conversation with people working in the city. If I go to university and I want to end up basically, being involved in the stock market, does that help me or hinder me? And basically the answer came back to that was, well, neither. Basically, it doesn't really matter which route you take. So, how about some other routes? Well, and as I said, I was told about school leaver programs and these things called merchant banks, and how if you basically started off at the right place, you can build a foundation. So, again, your life is basically plotted with luck, and my luck was that I spoke to the right people, I listened to the right people. And ended up at a merchant bank, which gave me that foundation.
No, well played. What's the biggest investment mistake you're prepared to admit to, and what did you learn from it, if anything?
Yeah, I think the first things first, and I think, again, if you just connect this back to sort of school and education, that making mistakes was probably something that you sort of penalised for. And I find that again when younger junior managers come in as well. The first thing you got to do is you've got to realise that you're going to make mistakes. You've got to be humble enough to realise you're going to make mistakes. Not only that, that when you make those mistakes, sometimes you're unlucky and sometimes you've misanalysed. So skill and luck plays a very large part of it. I mean, you and I talk sports all the time, mainly football, but and I think sporting analogies work really quite well with the world of investment in terms of making mistakes. And the 60% rule, I think, works. If you get 60% of your decisions right, either by skill or luck, it doesn't really matter, then over the long term, you're going to be up there amongst the winners. I think that is true whether you're looking at motor racing. But, Roger Federer, I mean, you look at him in terms of his, basically, scoring. And, if he won 6% of his points in a match, then he was going to win. He was going to win that match. And so I think that 60% rule works. So first things first is you're going to make mistakes. I think the mistakes that you make, and it's definitely all that sort of stuff around learning from them. Of course you do. You've got to record them down. You've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to, and that takes a time as well to be honest. That it was lucky, unlucky, it was skillful, unskillful. However, I think again when I think of sort of mistake stuff, I think it's almost breaking, like a golden rule, and which is compounding, the compounding rule, which, days out of the market, etc., etc. So, it's when I've been tempted away from that, and there's no better time than 2008 again. There was that slow car crash type environment, 2008 during the summer, and, we cashed up. That was fine. That was a good call. And then the next call is, well, when are you going to put it back in? So I don't regret what we did, but we basically said, right, well, I'm not sure how this market's going to play out. Who does? And we're talking about the future all the time, aren't we? The uncertainty of the future, and no one has a crystal ball. So what we decided was, I think in a very prudent risk management way, we will basically just divide those monies up into 3 parts, and over the next 12 months, we'll put one in now, one in the middle, and one at the end. And we put rules in, like, basically, should the market go up this amount, down this amount, then we'll put the next bets in. Fine. We carried that out over a 12-month period. Had we put all the money back in on day one, of course, clients would have been better off. So it's sort of, it's thinking about compounding all the time, and when you're making those big calls and you're coming out the market, well, history is not necessarily on your side. As we know, and you just look back at the data, the 10 biggest rises in the market over my 40-year career, most of them came in 2008, 2009. That period when we were basically going, or splitting into a third. So with hindsight, that would have been a mistake, and the mistake was actually, not adhering to the power of compounding.
Then just a couple more last quick questions. What advice would you given yourself on the first day in this business? If you can remember that far back.
Yeah, the first day in this business. Well,
that was ruder than I meant it to be.
Yeah, well, but it's true though, isn't it? It is almost 40 years ago. I do think that the whole sort of humbling of mistakes is probably the bigger one. Probably the biggest one. However, it's about sort of seizing the opportunities when they're given to you, and perhaps sometimes there've been opportunities where perhaps I haven't been, probably a rather sort of cautious, more prudent type fella. I probably haven't taken some of those opportunities, but no, I think I've been quite lucky really in terms of the way that things have panned out. But my largest slice of luck is that the people I've met, the people I've worked with, and the opportunities they've given me. So hence the reason why I'm always keen to give opportunities back to others.
Oh, that's nice. I feel I should end there, but I'm going to push back with one last question. We always finish up with the focusing on the choice of our choice words name. Can you come up with 2 recommendations? One would be a book. One is a free hit on anything else, just to recommend to our viewer.
Yeah, I mean books. I read books all the time, and I find that as a source of learning, which I think again, I would recommend to anyone in investment business, but any business in that respect. And I read quite widely as well, and various different things. I'm just reading a book at the moment. It's called Unreasonable Hospitality. It's about a restaurant in New York which gained its sort of not only Michelin stars, but a sort of recognition as one of the world's best restaurants. And again, if we're focusing on being service-led, that's a great book for that. I mean, yes, it talks about the hospitality industry, but it's more than that. If we're talking about a book which, if you are a fund selector, and then I think, a book that I would recommend amongst many others, by the way, would be that Richer, Wiser, Happier by William Green. I just think it's a superb book. I think it's a great book for understanding how some of the very best, greatest fund managers, how they work and how they operate. In terms of sort of broader than that, I think that, as I said earlier on, I think the way I found myself into this industry, I think there's still those foundations still exist. I think, clearly you start with your education, whether that's sort of primary, secondary, and further education, how far you want to go. You call it a bucket. You fill that up. Your second bucket is your network. You start with your parents. You start with your family. You start with then you've got your extended family, then you've got your friends, and you build your friends from primary school all the way up. And sometimes perhaps we want to talk a few regrets. Sometimes I regret not going to university when there are people that I've been to. I used to go to university then, but you're building your network. But but I think you're building of your network, and you do that through sports, perhaps sports teams, etc., etc. And I think building your network that continues throughout your whole career, along with your knowledge. And it's not necessarily, your knowledge, your skill, and your experience builds all the time as well. And that basically allows you to build your career. And I think those buckets are important going forward. And I think some people spend a lot of time in education, and I'm not necessarily think that provides you with the greatest job and career prospects going forward. As I said, I think what you need to do is always be building your knowledge and your skills and your network. And when you're moving on to the next job, does it do those things? Don't just move because it's going to pay you £25,000 more. I mean, move because I'm going to be building my knowledge, I'm going to be building my skills, and I'm going to be building my network. Because that's the way in which you build a career over the years. And when I think back over my career, I think it basically fits them as well. And as I said, I was very clear about what I wanted to do when I was a teenager. But there's another great book out there called Range, David Epstein. It talks to basically those people who are specialists, those people who are generalists. The two people that he characterized in the book, and I like playing golf. I love watching tennis. One is Roger Federer, who was very much a generalist and did not become sort of focus on tennis, I think, until he was 16, 17, 18. You might know better than I, but it was quite late in life. Whereas basically, Tiger Woods was born with a club in his hand, and he knew that's what he wanted to be. I think if you are a teenager upwards, whether you're in your 20s or your 30s, you're thinking, I'm still quite not sure where I want to be. Then read that book, because I think it will give you I think it will give you the encouragement that you need, that actually you're certainly not alone, and you might not find your calling in life until much later on. And as I said, I know I've been lucky. I'm very happy what I do. I really enjoy what I do, and the number of times I get asked, when you're going to give up, when I don't enjoy it, and at the moment I love it. I'm fortunate for that.
Excellent. And you can just maybe throw in one recommendation of the Roger Federer video addressed to the graduation as well, just to get that down into 2 points. What was the hospitality one? Yeah.
Hospitality is called Unreasonable Hospitality.
I have to say that sounded like my memoir, forthcoming memoir of my life as a journalist, but there we go. We'll leave it there. John, thank you so much. It's been so interesting. And, lovely to have you on. And thank you very much for watching. Do look out for further Choice Words videos as they come up.